perspective? Is there a way to get to a more progressive assessment using information that really focuses in on where risks need to be evaluated, or where there ought to be concerns, as opposed to just simply saying, once a year, you got to stand in front of it, you got to put the boat up on the dry dock, we're going to use a flashlight, look for, the hungry horse look, and then crop and renew. Better use of information, I think, makes it more effective.
That was the voice of Rear Admiral Wayne Arguin Jr. We talked to Admiral Arguin about how the U.S. Coast Guard is using its data to fulfill its mission of Semper Paratus, or always ready. Once again, thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you heard, leave the show a 5-star review. Every bit helps, as it gives us a higher ranking. Got a few minutes more? Even a few nice things to say about the podcast also goes a long way. I really do appreciate it. Take care, and wishing you fair winds and following seas. Now on to the podcast. Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. Today, we have another great guest from the United States Coast Guard, and this time we have Rear Admiral Wayne Arguin Jr., Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy, U.S. Coast Guard. Last year, we spoke to the U.S. Coast Guard Rear Admiral John Mauger, where we discussed, among other things, the U.S. Coast Guard digital journey and today we're going to talk to Admiral Arguin about where we stand today and what the future holds. Admiral, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Christopher. Looking forward to the conversation.
We spoke earlier, and I think this is really an exciting time for the Coast Guard, and certainly you guys are leading the charge, in kind of the digitization. My understanding, you have kind of 3 general directorates that you're accountable for: inspections and compliance, marine transportation systems, and commercial regulations and standards. Talk to me a little bit about, how the digital journey has impacted how you do things and kind of how it's going over there.
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, so 3 different directorates really focusing on the entirety of the marine transportation system. And so as part of our prevention concept of operations, we've developed standards. Then we evaluate whether those standards are meeting the intent, and then if they don't meet the intent, then we perform an assessment. And that sort of do loop of constantly assessing the system to ensure that we're providing the safest standards possible to ensure the safety of mariners and those that operate within the marine transportation system. That's really how we work. And so the 3 directorates that we have, the regulatory and standards development branch, or that team of folks that are trying to develop regulations and policies that support the latest generation of systems that are going to operate within the marine transportation system. The directorate that is inspections and compliance is what they say there. It's the inspections. It's evaluating and overseeing compliance with the standards that have been developed. And then the waterways management piece, those folks are really working on developing risk management tools that allow for vessels to operate safely within the marine transportation system. Now, in addition to those 3 directorates, I also oversee the licensing for mariners. So I've got the National Maritime Center, also vessel documentation, and then I have a Marine Safety Center, which is our engineering firm. So new plans that come in, the folks in the engineering world will evaluate those plans against those standards, and then deal with anything that really doesn't meet the current sort of model of regulation. So all the new technology that's coming into the marine transportation system, whether it's alternative fuels, whether it's novel ways to operate vessels, or winging ground craft, for example, anything that's out there that would operate within the marine transportation system, the engineering firm at the Marine Safety Center really focuses on that technical details of ensuring that those ships are planned and designed the way they need to be to operate safely. In addition, I've got national centers of expertise, and that really is sort of our effort to get after some of the novel technology that's out there. It's going to be really challenging for the Coast Guard to meet every new technologies that's out there and have the experience, the seasoning, to keep pace with the rapid injection of technology. And so we've established centers of expertise that can really focus in on those new technologies and then provide support to those field operators as that new technology is brought to bear within the marine transportation system.
A lot of it is very forward. It sounds like a lot of it, in addition to the traditional side of things, is very forward facing. And one of the interesting things, I think we talked a little bit earlier, is just when Admiral Barger mentioned something to the effect of with the digital initiative that the Coast Guard is undertaking in the first 2 years of it is expected to have more data points than the entire history of the Coast Guard, which is long and one of the oldest ones in the United States. Saying that and starting to get all of this data in on all these directorates, whether it's even something as more not necessarily routine for the people who are doing it, but getting a license or getting an upgrade to the forward-looking technology. How is this impacting how you're doing your job and then the folks under you that are, that work with you or work for you, and kind of how are they doing their job? Because I think it seems to be, in addition to drinking water from a fire hose, just on the technology of, like you mentioned, green fuels and wind assist, and we can even talk about AI. You also have to deal with all these new data points that may not have been there even a year or two ago, or at least, potentially are going to be there soon.
In my 31 plus years of being in the Coast Guard, there's been no more rapid advancement of technology and injection of that technology into the marine transportation system. Whether it's an increased number of vessels, 90% of what we consume comes across the water, and it's super important, and everybody wants more. So you're going to see more and more ships, and those ships are also going to be challenged to reduce their carbon footprint. And the only way you really get after that is to inject more technology, whether that's alternative fuels or whether it's bringing information in through digitization and being able to understand how to optimize routes or optimize operating systems. The inject of that technology and that digitization, access to information, and being able to synthesize that information in a way that is meaningful, I really do think opens a lot of new opportunities for us to manage risk differently. The Commandant's been very clear we need to think differently about how we've been doing our job. And so as we move forward, we've got to be more nimble, more agile, and data is really going to play a pivotal role in how we do that business going forward. And to your point, I think not only from a Coast Guard perspective, the type of folks that we're bringing into the service are going to need to be more technologically savvy. And so those STEM degrees that everybody loves to talk about, they are more and more important every day. It's going to be more and more difficult to not be, if you are not technologically savvy and understand how to manage information, understand how that information can be used to better inform your decisions, you're going to kind of be left on the side of the road. And I do think that not only within the Coast Guard, but across the marine transportation system, whether you're a longshoreman or whether you're a third or whether you're a master, you're going to have to be more comfortable working in a more technologically advanced society. The real challenge is going to be how do you incorporate that into existing training programs to just transition? How do you incorporate that into the training programs for mariners to ensure that they are prepared for the next generation of technologies? And all do that at a pace that is really, really moving much quicker than I think anybody really realized, given the emphasis on reducing carbon footprint and providing a more greener environment for transportation.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that comes down to training. I think there's kind of two underlying things. One is the training. I think STEM and having the awareness of that. I guess in a weird way I do have a STEM degree because it went to one of the maritime schools, but certainly I think you also have to have the desire to want to not necessarily change, but adapt to what can be made available. I had somebody on the podcast and they were talking about a warehouse that they deal with in the upper Mississippi that still does everything. They do everything by mail, by old fashioned mail. Everything goes in mail, no emails. It's all, and it's a warehouse. And if you look at that as one of the links in the transportation system, whether it's, and this is a warehouse, so it's more bills of lading and receipts, but it's just indicative about kind of how some people are a little more resistant to change. Certainly the other part, the training part in mariners is not just, everybody thinks about mariners as the commercial side, but certainly what you have to do, you have to start, the training for as people as you onboard the people in the Coast Guard as well.
Absolutely. And I know the majority of our officers come through the Coast Guard Academy, and we've transformed some of the training opportunities and the degrees that we have there to focus a little bit more on technology. Sort of data is a very big important portion of that. I think the other challenge that and I'll give you an example of where we're still sort of in the legacy world of not really embracing technology and data. Our National Maritime Center still has to use traditional postal service mail to send information back and forth. We're in the process right now of transforming that entire process, whether it's the training and how you get that training, how you document that training, or just evaluating the individual's credential, transforming that and bringing it into sort of a data-informed evolution. It's going to take some time to get there, but we've got a good plan going forward. And at the end of the day, it's going to leave us with a more reliable evaluation of an individual's ability to hold that credential. It's going to give us a more timely, responsive ability, but importantly, on the digitization and data front, it's going to give us a vast insights into the health and the areas where maritime and certainly on the credentialing side, where do we have some shortfalls that may impact supply chains? If we are running short on a particular type of individual, we can provide that information right now. I just don't have access to that data today because the way our system is built. The next generation of mariner credentialing program, that transformation is going to give us a vast array of information that will better inform where we need to be focusing our training and our recruiting efforts.
Yeah, I think, I know you and I spoke about this a little bit as well, is getting folks trained and having a constant stream of mariners. And that is one of the things that, like you said, could be a gap that you could identify and then go out to the schools and go out to other folks who are interested and say, hey, we can. I think a lot of times what people say is, oh, we know we're going to have a gap in mariners and we know we're going to need more, but to quantify that, I think becomes a little bit more powerful if you could say we're going to have a shortfall of 2,700 mariners. I'm making up a number. And by the year 2040, if we don't X, you can point to that now. You could kind of give anecdotal, but it's more qualitative than quantitative. Having those numbers, I think, definitely helps the cause of what you could do. And then what the entire kind of maritime industry, certainly in the U.S., and we see this across the globe, can do as well.
Yeah, I do think that as we start to look at the importance of maritime provides $5.4 trillion of economic prosperity to the country. And if you start to throttle that back, really understanding what those potential supply chain disruptions, get early warning indicators where you might be able to make some changes, data is going to be extremely important at how you get after that, not only for the Coast Guard, for MARAD, for the federal government, but for industry as well. Industry is going to want to know that they've got a steady supply of workforce available, not only that workforce that is trained and equipped to meet today's challenges, but also the workforce that's going to be able to meet the demands of the future. And that really is going to be something I think that's got to be paid attention to. We've got to find, I do think there will be a point very far in the future where we'll see, computers providing a lot of technology, autonomous operations. But for the foreseeable future, we're going to need to have humans on board ships, and we need to make sure that those humans are fully qualified and trained to meet the challenges of the next technology sort of iteration.
Whenever you say the word digital and technology and even AI, everybody gets a little freaked out about it because you think it's coming after your job. And I one of the things that I talked about early on in this podcast is somebody brought up the phrasing of human in the loop. There's always going to be human in the loop, right? I can't see a world where you have over 100 million, let's say a VLCC, because it's in my backyard, in terms of my experience, which is a brand new one, well over $100 million, even a 5-year-old one, the value of those ships. Plus you're going to throw 2 million barrels of oil on board, and you could just do the pricing of what a barrel of oil is. That's a very expensive asset. That's a very expensive bundle of asset that you have floating around that no way you're going to want to have run anonymously or autonomously, excuse me. So I think that is a little bit of it. At the same time, maybe there is some benefits of certain parts of that being a little more autonomous. And I'm sure that's something similar you guys see, whether crewing up, the Coast Guard or just kind of in general.
Yeah, I think when people think autonomous operations, they immediately jump to now a computer is going to be running the show and that humans are completely out of the game. And I don't think of it that way. I think of it as augmenting human interaction and taking and providing decision support information, things that you wouldn't be able to do if you use a lookout, for example. A lookout looks in one direction, hears in one direction, and can maybe multitask. Can a computer do that better to provide better information to the person that's got to make decisions? That's a form of automation, a form of autonomy. But people automatically jump to complete computer control. And I think, I mean, we are definitely going to be moving in that direction. I think about, lane assist for your vehicle. That is a form of automation that is keeping a lookout around your vehicle that helps me better drive. And so those same sort of technologies are going to be brought to bear into maritime that will better inform how those decision makers that are running those multi-million-dollar assets, carrying some really challenging cargoes, is going to make it better for them to be able to manage risk and focus ultimately what we pay mariners to do, to be able to move cargo from A to B safely, effectively, and efficiently. That's only going to make their jobs more effective and efficient and safe.
A lot of my guests have talked about is that we're just trying to make this job safer so that you could do the higher order function of making a course change, avoiding traffic. Maybe you now have some more data points to avoid the traffic that, let's say, weren't necessarily as noticeable to you right off the bat. You mentioned that the Commandant, she's kind of given the directorate of doing the job, finding creative ways to do job and better and things of that nature. And part of it, as we discussed, is kind of the digital, rolling out digital. How is that being received internally at the Coast Guard as you kind of roll this out through the ranks? Everybody from your level down, all the way through to people who are mechanics on a cutter off of Alaska, and then externally to the industry. As you start to roll out these programs, has industry started to not necessarily push back, but what kind of feedback have you gotten?
So I would say, I would categorize certainly within the Coast Guard, guarded excite. I think the younger generation is more comfortable with technology, and they are looking for opportunities to inject that technology, think differently, use new systems that will help them, and they're more comfortable with it. I think there's a smaller pocket of folks that are like, I'm not so sure about this. I'm a little bit old school, but I think that transition to adopting new technology is going to move a lot quicker, and that younger generation of folks that sees the value and can see beyond sort of, this is how I've always done it, they're going to be able to take advantage of that, bring those tools to bear in a much more effective way. I think similarly in industry, there are those that would say, I think I need to be looking out the window 100% of the time. I don't need the computer to do that. I saw this when I was in New Orleans when they were bringing Z drives on board, and I was doing a commissioning for one of the small towboats, and they brought a Z drive in there, and so they were one of the captains there had been around for a while, had driven shafted barn door old school towboats. I said, so what do you think about this? And he goes, you know what? I hated it at first. It didn't react the way I expected to, but once I got used to it, I loved it. I had more control. It was different than I was trained. I took a little bit of time to get used to that. And the new folks that came in loved it. They didn't know anything different, right? But they recognized they had more control and it was a safer operation. I think you're going to see that same transition. There'll be folks that are just not gonna play, and those folks will eventually, the technology will pass them by. But I think across the board, people are excited about the opportunity to bring, and arguably maritime has been a slow adopter of technology. If you look at fuels, it's been a standard diesel engine forever. Once we shifted from sail to steam, now we're thinking about all kinds of different, and you're bringing new non-maritime folks into maritime. Folks that have been dealing with LNG are now being brought in, nuclear. So there's a lot of new technology, new fresh ideas that are being brought into maritime, and I think are all great stuff. And it's pretty exciting for me. I know as an engineer, a slow speed diesel was pretty much there. I mean, there's not a whole lot of new technology there. You start bringing in all these alternative fuels. How do you bring that to bear? There's a freshness that comes with it that I think a lot of folks are really excited about.
I know one of the concerns, especially when you got to the ultra low sulfur diesels and using MGO in that, one of the issues, which, from a commercial side, it's like, yeah, whatever, stick in the engine. But, the engineers I know, and I know a lot of them, having my background, wait a minute here, you're losing something called lubricity, right? You're losing lubricity. And then how does the engine react? And then what are we looking for? Then are you sure we want to do this? Because we're going to have this problem with the potentially seizing up. And it's all these issues that, if it gets your engineering juices flowing, right? Because it's not something, like you said, the 4-stroke, 2-stroke engine, whatever it is, that's been around forever. We've been using it. Yeah, there's been iterations and they make it better and automation, but now we're going to start to inject, can you use methanol? How do we do this? How do we do these sort of things while keeping the integrity? An interesting comment that I had on a recent podcast, and it was somebody at Oldendorf who said, we're actually, the maritime business, and I'm going to paraphrase, is actually a little bit better at adapting and adopting technology than what people give it credit for. It's only because there's such a high bar that we actually have to adopt things. In other words, it has to be proven that, if you put, let's say, an alteration to a diesel engine, shoreside, okay, it's not going to be in crummy weather. It's going to have the vibration that you can account for, not any additional vibration because you're, rocking at sea or kind of in unusual trim circumstances. So I think that's something that's interesting as well. As you kind of roll out through this and internally and externally, what has kind of been some of the major challenges? You talked a little bit about people pushing back a little bit. Anything else that kind of has challenged you a little bit unexpectedly as you roll out, let's say, whether it's through the Maritime Training Center or other places?
Probably the biggest challenge is the uncertainty going forward, right? There's no clear winner on the alternative fuel side. And so if there was a clear winner, everybody would invest their time, their training in perfecting that, making sure that the guardrails, the safety standards that are in place were focused in on that. But the variety of different options that are out there, and at least from a Coast Guard perspective, that is going to challenge us, because while a particular company can pick, for example, methanol, and invest all their time, focus their individual training efforts on methanol and how that can be operated safely, my inspectors in the field have to be prepared for everything, because today you might see a methanol ship, tomorrow you might see an LNG dual fueled, you might see a nuclear the next day. And so that is really going to pressurize how we do our training, how we evaluate those different systems. They're not going to be as simple as, all right, make sure the low speed diesel lube oil pressure system fires off and you get the red light. There's going to be something different. And so it's going to require a little bit more robust and more sort of a la carte training program that is going to be, again, more higher end, right? You're going to need to have some special skill sets as we're building the standards. And so to me, that's probably the biggest challenge. And time is not on our side. Industry is not going to wait for the Coast Guard to catch up. We've got to be partners with industry, with our classification societies, as well as the international community, to make sure that we're all moving at the same pace so that nobody is really delaying the opportunity to bring that technology to bear.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that it goes with, whether it's testing and monitoring as well is going to be a whole other aspect of it. And then, of course, once you get all this data, how to help that process along, right? Because you may start to see patterns with dual fuel LNG ships that you could kind of, spread out to the field and then to industry saying, hey, we're seeing this, maybe not a problem, but this potentially could bubble up. And we notice this through our data, through our inspections. So certainly that could be not only a challenge, but a little bit of a positive view on this, on, kind of moving forward with technology as well.
Yeah, I do think, and we're having these conversations right now about how do you transition sort of that regulatory framework. Historically, it's been very prescriptive. Something bad happens, you investigate, you come up with recommendations to fix that instance that then can be broadly applied to a segment of the industry. I think there's an opportunity with the inject of information, AI, and machine learning to be able to take advantage of information that's coming in and be able to evaluate what you need to be looking at, as opposed to just drawing a line in the sand and saying, once a year, you need to take a look at your generator, or you need to haul your vessel out to look at the hull. Take advantage of that information and be able to target where you may be seeing areas of concern. Industry has done this for a while with reliability centered maintenance or predictive maintenance. They're pulling tons of information off of ships, paying attention to the vibrations associated with a pump, and then based on those vibrations, it tells them, rather than waiting till the pump fails, go ahead and take that one offline and replace it. We need to be thinking about that from a regulatory perspective. Is there a way to get to a more progressive assessment using information that really focuses in on where risks need to be evaluated or where there ought to be concerns, as opposed to just simply saying, once a year, you got to stand in front of, you got to put the boat up on the dry dock. We're going to use a flashlight, look for, the hungry horse look, and then crop and renew. Better use of information, I think, makes it more effective. But we're not removing steel, or we're not requiring something that isn't going to be ultimately something that's going to be necessary for the safe operation of the vessel. And it better maximizes the utility of my limited workforce. We're in a challenge. We don't have, we're recruiting challenge right along with everyone else. And so being able to put more effective tools in the hands of our limited resources and put steel on target, if you will, to make sure that those resources are maximally effective. I think data is going to be extremely important in that effort.
And even internally here, as my role in product management, you always try to figure out what's the most effective way to use your resource, right? Whether it's an engine, on our end, a developmental engineer to kind of look at a certain solution, or do I fix this problem? That's not really a problem, right? Because I only have certain amount of resources over a certain given amount of time. We talked a little bit about this, and kind of it's been permeating through our discussion, which I think is fantastic. Is if you had to do some recruiting, whether it was for the Coast Guard, the Coast Guard Academy, or potentially even just industry as a whole, what would you say to people to come into our industry? Like, instead of, let's say, going to work in general technology or going to work, in industrial engineering, civil engineering, what would you say to somebody, or maybe somebody who has a degree and thinking about, coming aboard as a civilian mariner, in your case, with the Coast Guard, or joining a shipping company? What would you tell them why they should join, the ranks of us?
Well, first and foremost, if without shipping, we're not able to deliver the forces that we need to maintain our sort of posture as a global power, and everything, 90% at least, comes across the water. And so there's always going to be a need. Shipping is the most efficient way to move cargo. There's always going to be a need to have folks in that industry to be able to bring those goods and services that everybody wants to have they order something last night and it shows up on their doorstep. That's only going to get more, there's going to add more pressure to that system. I do think that the ability, so when I've talked to different folks about the challenges with bringing folks in, the number one challenge that folks talk about is this distance, right? So you get on a ship, you're an island, and you're away from your family and friends. I do think that the inject of technology and access to information now on ships, that remoteness is gone. You are able to maintain your connectivity with the outside world outside of your ship. Gone are the days where you're going to need to use a radio to talk to your loved one. You're going to be able to FaceTime because of that technology inject with access to satellite-based communications. That same inject of information and the ability to pull information off a ship that's going to be used for optimization is also going to be helpful for mariner mental health. Being able to reach out in that connectivity is going to be super important. To me, there is no greater value than what you can bring to the table in your job, and being able to deliver. During COVID, we owe a debt of gratitude to all mariners throughout the world. We would not have been able to sort of isolate ourselves in our basements and order Amazon or whatever without dedicated 24/7 mariners throughout the world doing their job. And in most instances, those folks were not allowed to leave their ship because of the fear associated with potential transmission. But the fuel doesn't move, the food doesn't show up, those PlayStations or whatever that people were ordering don't show up without mariners and shipping. And so it's a vital, important, there's not a nation out there that hasn't got some connection to shipping that is directly connected to their ability to increase their GDP. And so if you want to work in a place where you're going to make a difference, in my mind, maritime's it. And there's plenty of people looking for folks. If there's no shortage of industry representatives, every person I talk to in the industry is looking for the next mariner to show up and be part of their team.
I had somebody on, a CEO of a company that has to do with kind of not optimism, but tracking of individual containers and container ships. And he said, one of the things that I tell people is, yeah, you can go to work, and he views his competition as like Silicon Valley and Boston, the I-28 corridor or 25 corridor, whatever that is. He said, you could go to work for one of these tech companies and make, Uber for dogs or whatever, really successful. But if you could work for a company and change efficiency within a ship or change efficiency within the maritime system by 1%, you are saving millions of dollars for a company potentially. And if you do it across the entire system, you're saving billions of dollars. Like I think you mentioned just in the United States, was it the United States or GDP, $5.6 trillion. I think it was the global GDP of the value, that.
Yeah. $5.4 trillion annually is a direct result of shipping.
If you can make 1% change in that, that's a savings on that. That is a tremendous amount of money. If you think about that, it could be used for other resources. And I think that if the more that we become connected as a kind of global community, the more I think people are aware of that as well.
I completely agree. And when I've also talked to folks, back in the day, it was, hey, go see the world. You can still see the world, right? Your job moves around the world. You get an opportunity to see a variety of different cultures, interact with a lot of folks. Pay is really great. And there's a lot of opportunities to bounce around different segments of the industry, all the way from small passenger vessel operations, all the way up to the largest, most complex floating platforms, and all the new stuff that's coming along with wind development, aquaculture, space. There's just a lot of opportunities. And most people, when you think about, I'm going to be in maritime, the first thing to think is mariners and credentials. But there is so much more to that, whether it's, like, as you mentioned, the shoreside operations, the waterways management piece, understanding there is no more effective or efficient way to move things. And the shared use waterways issues that we're dealing with right now, whether it's everybody wants to take advantage of that particular square mile of ocean for their own benefit. To me, that's a place where there's some governance that can be taken in place from a federal perspective, but then there's also a lot of folks that recognize that there's a lot of opportunity in maritime.
It's unbelievable. People look at me and they go, well, you're an expert in maritime. I'm like, well, yeah, but if you ask me about credentialing or inland waters, I'm going to look at you like you had lobsters growing out of your head, because I'm not going to be an expert in that. I understand kind of commercial trading is kind of where I live and breathe, or used to, and kind of where my products live and breathe. But you go beyond that, talk about other things. I could probably have a general understanding, but if you get into the nuance or the expertise level, it's such a wide variety of expertise that is needed and can hit on so many different things. I think it's completely appealing. What's appealing to me is not appealing to somebody else, but vice versa. And I think that that's one of the great things. And obviously what the Coast Guard is doing has a great slant on it. And I think it's fantastic. And kind of, you guys are taking the lead from a government point of view in terms of moving forward with moving things digital, which is pretty awesome.
I'm still in the service because it's still fresh and still interesting, and there are plenty of opportunities. And you mentioned, so maritime is largely the forgotten workforce, right? The only time people really pay attention to maritime is when there's a disruption, and small disruptions lead to large impacts. And so most of the time things happen, ships come and go, fuel shows up, but one of those ships doesn't show up. People start to pay attention. And so I think it's just that we need to do a better job of explaining the significance of maritime as across the board as a nation, the impacts of the potential for supply chain challenges that will have direct impacts on somebody in Idaho, that grain farmer in Nebraska, the corn farmer in Nebraska that's trying to get their cargo to sea. That's where they're making their money. And if there's a disruption like there is right now in the Mississippi River with low water, that has a direct impact on their ability to get their cargo not only where it needs to go in the United States, but globally. People just it doesn't make the news, but it will make the news when there are challenges. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, we saw that with the Ever Given, but a couple of years ago, we saw that with other things, and certainly, and then the other challenge will happen maybe in a couple of weeks where we have a few weeks of rain, and all of a sudden it's hard to move stuff on the river because it's too high, which becomes the complete. We've gone from literally from, well, not from feast to famine, but from famine to feast. I've seen that as a broker, where one minute it's like, well, we have a little restriction because of this type of weather, and then the next 2 weeks later, we have a restriction because of a different type of weather. And it's kind of, most people don't think of it other than an inconvenience for a couple of days either way, and they don't understand kind of the overall impact. As we start to wrap up, I love to ask this question because I love to see what people are doing. What are you're busy, you're an admiral, you have this directorate, you have people. I appreciate all of your staff, by the way, who kind of got us to this point. I'll give them a shout out in the podcast because they helped me get to this point, and I appreciate them. So you have your staff, you're running, you're at headquarters. Do you have time to read? If so, what are you reading? And you could cheat a little bit. I've had plenty of people who say, I'm doing audiobooks, which is fantastic. And then I've also had some people actually who said they're writing books. So don't know if you have time to go down that road, but what are you reading or what have you read recently that's kind of interesting?
I'm not super exciting, right? I as an engineer, I don't think I'll ever write a book. But I spend most of my time reading technical reports and technical articles, really trying to maintain sort of a bit of an edge on kind of where industry's going. Whether it's some of the novel ideas with nuclear reactors and how that might be brought to bear in the MTS, or whether it's some of the challenges with training folks on LNG. I haven't really spent a lot of time in like the real big books on management or any of those kind of things. Really, I'm just trying to catch up with the latest and greatest of where industry is trying to go, because at the end of the day, I've got to prepare the Coast Guard for ensuring that we are at least informed about the direction, and that technical work really is, there's so much of it out there. I do listen to podcasts my ride home in the commute, whether it's Women Offshore. Ali Steno does a
great
podcast
on
the sort of mariner challenges in the industry. I try to keep up with just the technology. I spent a lot of time looking at Class Society reports because they're doing a lot of work. And paying attention to different media out there that are really talking about the cutting edge. There's just so much happening right now that it's hard to keep pace with it. So I'm sorry, it's not that.
Hey, we've had everything from sci-fi, fantasy to management books to everything in between. But I appreciate it that you are trying to keep up with it, because I do try to. I'll print out something maybe not technical, but certainly, the UN has they do their global trade review. I'll actually print that out once in a while, or put that up on a laptop and try to read through that. And I think it's the same sort of thing. I looking at it from a different point of view, but they make some really good things there. But I do try to listen to some of the other podcasts. Certainly Lena Gottberg on her This Is Shipping podcast, which is very, very, very good about, it's a very good one that I like to listen to. And of course, all the, DNV and these other people, they all have some really interesting podcasts as well. So once again, Admiral, thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for your support and service and everything. And looking forward to the next couple of years. And I'm sure we'll have somebody else on from the Coast Guard. I do love having you guys on, just because nothing else. You have the best motto, always semper paratus, always be prepared, always prepared, right?
Yep, always ready.
Always ready. So, you guys have to be ready for the challenges. And I think that sum up this podcast. Thank you for coming on.
Well, I do appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to doing it again if the opportunity presents itself. Next time I'm up in Boston, I'm sure I'll be having an opportunity to meet with Admiral Mauger, and maybe we can get together for lunch.
Absolutely. If our schedules collide, I'd love to even maybe my folks will have you come by the office to see what kind of the technology looks like well. So maybe we could arrange something like that. Admiral, thank you for coming on.
All right, thank you.